Now then, we're going to kickstart our panel discussion today. Of course, it's going to be a technical debate entitled Future Casting, Cybersecurity and Innovations in ICS. Now, to moderate this, I'm delighted to welcome back onto the stage CEO and founder of Digital Bond and S4, Dale Peterson. Hello, Dale. Now, he's also going to be joined by 5 panelists. So may I invite back onto the stage Chief Security Officer at SAP, Justin Somaini. He's going to be joined by Industrial Cybersecurity Expert at AECOM Management Services, Joel Langill. Welcome back, Joel. Cybersecurity Sales Lead for MEA at Microsoft, Girard Moussa. And our final 2, founder of Shodan, Mr. John Matherly. Welcome back, John. Far too far away. And last but not least, ICS Security Lead at BBA, Ernie Hayden. Welcome back, Ernie. So this is where I'm going to hand over to Dale. We're going to have a 40-minute panel discussion. There's going to be 30-minute chat on stage, and then we're going to bring it over to you for 10-minute Q&A. May I strongly encourage you, if you've got questions, please write them down so that when Dale and I go to the Q&A session, we can do it fluently and interactively. Dale, enjoy.
Well, good afternoon. Equate and the conference committee did a very nice thing. They gave me 5 incredibly experienced, talented people here on the panel, and their background is so widespread that it was hard to pick one issue to focus the panel on. So what we decided to do actually is look a bit into the future, and we're going to talk about a lot of different areas, a lot of different topics. I'm going to try to keep it moving here, but we're going to try to raise issues and ideas and things you should be thinking about for the next 1 to 3 years. And for the panelists, there are microphones on the table in front of you. Ernie, why don't you grab one, because I'm going to start with you. We heard, I think, in Sinclair's presentation that we spent a lot of time on protection, but in the ICS world, we're a little deficient, or we have a lot of work to do when it comes to detection. So Ernie, in your talk on physical security, you too were focused on protection. What should the audience be thinking about or expecting to see when it comes to detecting physical intrusions in the next few years?
Okay, thanks, Dale. Probably, you posed this question to me earlier in our preparations, and I've been thinking about this. And even at lunchtime, I was talking to a gentleman regarding this issue. And really, if you think about the new future attack vector, there's the classic ones, you know, there's the ground forces, for physical, there's also cyber attacks and so forth. But an area that's if you will, contemporary concern right now is drones and unmanned aerial vehicles, UAVs. And just frankly, for one of the things for people to start thinking about, in addition to all the other stack of concerns they have, and that is start thinking about what do you do about drones and drone attacks. And in this part of the world, ISIS has been actively using prepackaged drones out of the box to deliver bombs and wreak havoc. So our suggestion, or at least my suggestion would be, is put drone defense on your list of things to worry about. And again, in addition to all the other activities you have on your plate.
Okay, and I told the panelists before, I'm not going to go down the row on each and every question, but you are very welcome to chime in if you have a thought. John, in your talk this morning, you talked quite a bit about what's on the internet, but you didn't talk a lot about how an ICS asset owner should identify if they have any of those bad things on the internet. What should they be looking at both as a one-time thing and ongoing thing to identify if they have any of those risks of internet-connected devices?
Yeah, so obviously you should be using Shodan. That's an easy answer. But seriously, so there are two scenarios that we see, right? A, if you know your network range, if you know your IP block, there are enough tools nowadays that even most IT security products or the IT scanners, they will have functionality to check the basic ICS protocols, like Modbus, all these other things. The functionality is there where all these external network monitoring services can do that for you, and it's very cheap. It's not expensive to get started with just, give them your IP range and they check it every few minutes or whatever interval you want. The difficulty that we see is for utilities that do not know their public IP range, that do not even understand what an IP is. For example, once we talked to a utility and we said, hey, you're on Shodan, you're on the internet, you need to secure this. And their response was, no, it's okay, we have a static IP address. Only we can connect to it. And this is always an educational problem. They didn't realize what a static and dynamic IP was, what the internet, how it works, frankly. And in those cases, really, from our perspective, it's an education problem. And it's also something where, I think we've heard this a few times over this conference, is that there must be better collaboration with IT. Because I do believe IT will have a better understanding of those aspects of things. And finally, you need to have good asset discovery, because any sort of network monitoring service will not help you if you don't know what you run.
Okay. Again, panelists, if you want to chime in, feel free. But Girard, let me ask you, I'm going to ask maybe a little broader question here. We hear a lot, and I'm sure the audience has, it's almost impossible to miss about machine learning and how that's going to affect ICS. But we hear it primarily around operational efficiencies, predictive maintenance, things of that nature. How is machine learning going to affect the security features, functions, products that are used in ICS in the future?
Excellent question. So machine learning, as most of us know, right, it's an aspect as well of artificial intelligence and machine learning, where there's a lot of data coming in. So today, if we look at the IT side of things, there's a lot of data being fed into a SIM, Security Information Event Management, and then there are rules, correlation rules that get kicked off, alerts. So there's a lot of alert fatigue, with a lot of analysts looking at all this data and trying to figure out what's happening, what's important, and so forth. So with machine learning and artificial intelligence, there's a new field of study called user behavior analytics. There is lots of solutions on the IT side that look at baselining the behavior, baselining what's happening on the network, on the infrastructure, and then identifying anomalies. This same technology can be used as well on the OT side. Today, if we look at anomalies on the OT side, there are mainly three kinds of anomalies. One, human error, which seems to be, I guess, one of the biggest anomalies out there. Secondly, it might be a defective device or machine out there, right, sending out different or wrong sort of messages, process control, and so forth. And thirdly, cyber attacks. So again, taking this technology into the OT, actually there are already some providers out there doing that today, identifying, understanding all this machine data, and then identifying those anomalies before they can trigger, obviously, an attack or something that will impact and disrupt the entire OT.
Go ahead.
Now I got a question for you to follow on to that theory. So one of the holdbacks that I see with clients is their resistance to want to offload security sensitive information. Is what you're talking about going to be practical and be able to be done on site, inside the fence? Or is it always going to demand people disclosing and providing extremely sensitive and confidential information to cloud service providers, to Watson, to whoever else wants to get into data analytics?
A great question. Today, at the moment, most of the technologies we see out there, an example I've seen in the OT world, Nozomi networks, it's all based on-premise, right? So you don't need to offload anything to the cloud. It's able to use, today machine learning, it's like having hundreds of analysts working for you. It's just about doing the same task over and over again, which humans tire of, and in most cases, they might miss some important aspects. So at the moment, most of the technologies exist on-premise, but with time, you would see some offloading to the cloud.
And we see that today. I mean, so with HANA and the supervised and unsupervised algorithms built into the HANA database, that obviously can be on-premise or in the cloud. And we look at the security space, whether it's legacy SIMs trying to implement machine learning algorithms or newer ones like Niara that was recently acquired, you start to see the introduction of mostly anomaly detection because it's much, much easier to implement. But the real value is really around supervised machine learning algorithms, I believe. But the problem is, in a general sense, is the training data in which to teach those classifiers of what is a specific malicious activity. With IoT in general, or machine-machine communication, whether it's ICS, that is very different than a human-to-machine because we have a significant amount of training data already stored within our environments to be able to train those algorithms and to get high efficacy on unknown attacks versus the regular expression correlation rules of what we use today. And most of that is going to be done on-premise with Hadoop grids, Hadoop clusters rather, and other types of databases versus standard SQL databases that you typically see being serviced out of the cloud. But going back to your point, it's really one or the other. I would kind of push back in regards to security or cloud environments being insecure. I think that is a very important discussion versus consumer-oriented solutions versus what I would call enterprise-ready business solutions. But regardless of which, it is a new wave of technologies that companies are using. And those requirements, whether it's ICS, whether it's financial, whether it's government regulatory or otherwise, need to be heavily discussed on how we drive them, how we standardize them, and how do we vet them based upon the threat that we all see.
So I think when we're talking, most of what we see today in ICS in terms of taking security-related events and processing them in some way, either the way we're doing it today or in the future, is primarily passive type of things, looking at logs, looking at monitored data. John, do you see the potential that people will actually start using some sort of scanning tool to proactively probe, send data on the network and actually look at the status as opposed to just listening?
I would seriously hope so. And I think there also needs to be a better understanding of what scanning means to different people. So for Shodan, for example, scanning does not include vulnerability testing. So we don't try sending garbage data to a Modbus port and seeing what it returns. So a lot of these things, asset discovery-wise on ICS, can be done, what I presume is fairly safely. I don't expect anything to break if you send it a proper command. So I would hope that people can, in the future, become much more proactive about these things. And I know, just based on my own experience with the protocols we've worked with, is that over time, a lot of these proprietary things are becoming reverse engineered. So even regular open source projects like Nmap are starting to get the capability to perform this type of asset discovery if you want it.
So just to add to that, today we see a lot of proactive assessments happening. So a vulnerability assessment, I compare it to a security guard just walking around the building, checking if there are open doors, right? Then alerting of the persons and they can lock the doors. Whereas what we're seeing today is proactive compromised assessments, right? And so it's part of our cybersecurity offerings as well. It allows you to go in, a team of experts go in and actually proactively look if you have been breached. So if those doors that were open in the past, someone already went in, even if you closed them, believe it or not, sometimes the attackers are patching those vulnerabilities so that no one else can go in. And they're sitting in there and on your environment, whether it's IT or OT, there is an end result. So a lot of the attacks we've seen over the past few months in the region, the common part, and we can divulge this because nothing's confidential, the malware had domain user admin and passwords embedded in it, which means the attacker was in there for many, many weeks, if not months. So proactively looking at those assessments, whether using tools or today the best way is to use human analysis alongside those tools, machine learning and AI.
Go ahead, Ernie.
Just an immediate thought that hit me on the proactiveness too is look at your supply chain. I mean, go way upstream to try and understand what are you receiving when you buy it, and how do you verify and validate that what you purchased is truly configured the way it's supposed to be, and that, although easier said than done, is how do you verify there haven't been backdoors, et cetera, embedded into the device that you just purchased. So that's a means of proactiveness in my mind.
You know, oh, go ahead, Joe.
Yeah, something about, to talk about the comment just shortly before. It's very little value for somebody to come in and take an automated tool and whoever's you want to use, whether you're a Qualys, I'm a Nessus guy personally because I can customize it. God forbid you use OpenVAS. But the idea is that tool by itself adds very little value to anyone, because all it does is it'll take what it finds and then compare it against the database of common vulnerability scores and present a number, and all of a sudden you'll get this arbitrarily inflated, oh my God, this vulnerability is critical because it's got a score of 10. So one of the things that our team always does is we actually take that and we lay against it the exploitability scoring, because in general, a vulnerability is a vulnerability and it should be taken seriously, but a vulnerability oftentimes, and in most cases, is not easily exploitable. So though you could get a CVSS, and depending on if you want to use current versioning, if you got a 10 score, but the ability to actually turn that into a working, an exploitable vulnerability is very low. It needs to be ranked as such. Because what we're seeing is people are trying to automate too much of this process and take, you know, I'm an engineer, and I'm sure a large portion of this room is as well. Engineering judgment's never going to be replaced by a machine. And we always have to keep this in line when we try to do things so that we make sure we do prioritize and respond accordingly.
You know, I'll get off this scan topic in just a second, but what about, we're seeing, and you saw it on a number of the presentations, how the topic of inventory management and asset management is gaining, you know, well overdue recognition that that's an important part, actually knowing what's in your control system today and throughout time. Do we see these types of tools automating inventory management in the next 1 to 3 years? Go ahead, Joel. I kind of meant that for you.
Sorry to be 2 in a row. I promise I won't do it again. That was the best lunch discussion today. We got into that exact discussion at lunch because I'm on the camp that is very, very against operational automation of tools. And the main reason is that when you look at a standard enterprise network, if you do count the true diversity of equipment that you have, though your number of endpoints can be extremely large, the true diversity of those endpoints is not. Many enterprises tend to standardize on particular brands of hardware. They tend to very much standardize on platform OS software. So you don't have this problem that we do in the operational side where a single integrated industrial control system that we would see in a plant could have hundreds, if not thousands of different IP-connected devices from different hardware suppliers. And I am absolutely against any automation of tool until you can give me 100.0% assurance that whatever you do will never, not most of the time, not almost all of the time, will never impact the operation of that device. And I think we're a very, very long ways away from that. Again, because there's just so many companies that make so many different types of products. And then layer on top of that the IIoT or Industry 4.0 variants of devices. I see this being a very unmanageable problem. Just use caution.
Okay, well, I think, Justin, why don't we go down to you, and you're probably in the perfect job and position to kick off this part of the discussion. We've got these legacy ICS systems all over the world, certainly a lot of them in Kuwait, and now they're needing to connect to SAP and other systems in the enterprise and the cloud. What do you see as some of the biggest impediments to doing that, and maybe some of the things people should be looking at to make it go better in the next 3 years?
Yeah, when I look at anything in regards to machine communication, whether it's ICS systems or more of the recent consumer-oriented IoT, the first question comes to me is really around the network itself, not the network as far as the transport system, but the network in regards to the devices communicating into the analytics engine, which I would consider, in this particular case, the SAP analytics system. How do you understand the protocols communicating back and forth? And with legacy systems, there's a big lack of understanding of IP individuals understanding those protocols to be able to put security understanding within them. And we started seeing new technologies come around of really diagnosing those protocols to understand whether it's good, bad, or indifferent. Behind the protocol inspection is really the analytics engine. And the first question that comes into mind is, can I trust that device is sending data with proper integrity? Has it been compromised? Is it sending malicious data in order to subvert the analytics component itself? That is a very big problem that we have in the industry, where there's a very difficult capability to understand the integrity of the device. Has it been compromised? It doesn't run the right operating system. Has it been exploited in some sense? And that goes both legacy and new systems versus workstations and servers that we have today, where we can implement TPM chip certificates and have some capabilities. And so that is probably, to me, one of the most significant hurdles that we have to overcome, which is more of a hardware issue. Well, much to your point that you were speaking earlier, I don't think it's going to be overcome in probably the next 5-10 years in my lifetime. But having said that, I really worry about the integrity of the data coming in to really do proper analytics. The second one is, can we understand and have assurance that the analytics engine itself hasn't been manipulated? So we've seen this in fraudulent transactions, penny slicing, and for financials, salami sandwich fraud techniques for years, actually. We've seen this in authentication systems. We should expect the same type of malicious activity to really occur in industrial controls or analytics in a greater sense, regardless of what capability, malicious for a loss of life, financial, or just wreaking havoc. And then the third, of course, is manipulation on the output. How do I manipulate the reader of the system to really create an action in which they did not intend, but because they were given malicious data or fraudulent data, they took action A versus action B. And so from all of those capacities, I really look at how do we close the network to ensure that the devices that we have on it have been reviewed, vetted, approved. We have some sort of baseline of jailing of those devices. We have some sort of protocol analysis to understand the signals coming into the analytics engine. We have integrity of the analytics engine itself, and we have output scrubbing to human or other machines to really ensure that the output is what we expect it to be. So it's that full life cycle in which we look at it.
You know, it's funny as you're talking and giving that answer, it's so evident that the issues are highly based on where you sit, because a lot of what you're talking about is this data good? Are we performing the proper analytics? Maybe if we can get Ernie a mic, maybe Ernie, if I can ask you a question, what about the flip side of that? What about the risk of having now this one-way or two-way communication with an external network? What about the risk? How are we going to deal with the risk to the control system and operations?
So I think Joel and I are of the opinion that you really want to still have, quote, the air gap as best you can. It's not practical. It's basically, I love Eric Byer's comment that unicorns are more frequently available than air gaps in ICS systems. But I would suspect that you have to think through any, whether it be one-way, two-way, or whatever, communication between the control system and the enterprise. Because the enterprise will certainly give you nasty things that go into your control system, but also the control system feeding into the enterprise, I'd have to think, why am I even doing that? Probably the closest would be moving your historian data across, if you will, the DMZ back into the enterprise. So I think the logic is maybe a data diode or a one directional device might be it's a technological solution, but the question is even more fundamental than that. Why do I even need to do that? So I'm not sure I'm answering the question, but my reaction is I tend to be a person who looks at things much more fundamentally and more basic and try not to complicate it with new technologies that, frankly, are difficult to manage at times.
So, I mean, at one point or another, there might be two-way communications, and where we see most of the attacks today coming in is by compromising identity. Right? So if we look at the IT side, identities are being compromised, and then accordingly devices, infrastructure taken over. So, I mean, as Microsoft, we spend over $1 billion every year on securing our customer through different solutions, right? And again, same with lots of other vendors, I mean, from SAP and so forth. There's a lot that the customers can do on the IT side, right, to reduce, and as mentioned before, there's no 100% security. At the same time, we have to assume breach, and so that's where, again, going back to machine learning and the whole AI, they can help you identify this, but the issue remains that identity is being compromised, and the attackers are taking over this identity and then using it to jump across not only from one network to another, but as well from one tier to another. So we really need to look at how we can secure those different tiers and the actual entry point as well.
I wanted to add one thing to Ernie's comments, a little findings from the field. And for you, I would suggest we talk about 62443 because it talks about exactly that problem and how we recommend mitigating it. But to Ernie's comment regarding these communications, what's been very interesting, I was in a couple engagements where we were at that point of the assessment where we're doing a general architectural review of communication and data flows. And we looked at this spaghetti of communication interfaces. And we asked the same question, why? Why are you doing all this? And after the better part of a day, the only answer we could find was because we could 15 years ago. So remember, back in the 90s, the mid to late 90s was kind of that decade of integration. Everybody was trying to integrate everything they could if they could. But when we actually sat down and rationalized it, what we found was exactly what Ernie said. We were able to realign a couple of the application platforms, moving them from an enterprise zone to more of an intermediary zone, which is where they belong, and eliminate the majority of the connectors and replace them through simple, manageable, SQL-to-SQL type communication mechanisms, which are very well defined. There are numerous products, including unidirectional gateways, that handle that flawlessly. So again, we encourage, whenever you start to look at the basis of some of these problems, it's really important to actually find out a reason why, and if you can't justify it, why don't you try removing it, and then work from there.
Okay, why don't you hold on to that mic, because I have another question for you. But I just want to tell the audience, I'm going to open it up for questions from the audience. I have a long list here, but you take priority. So if you have a question, in about 5 minutes, we'll open it up for questions. But Joel, I have to ask you one of the questions that's been asked for maybe the last 5 or 10 years, and that's, we look at safety. Safety has mind share. Safety has budget. Safety has resources. Safety is taken very seriously throughout the asset owner organizations, with actually very few exceptions. It's almost universally considered important. What is it going to take to get security? I'm not saying at the same expenditure level, but the same commitment that security is important and it gets the appropriate resources to do the job.
That's really a good question, and I have to commend Dr. Ibrahim for his earlier presentation where he put in big bold letters, safety's number one. Safety is and always will be number one. And probably when we start to move into more smaller forums where we tend to get into that polarization and segregation between whether you're information security or operational security, that always comes into play. Because in the field, safety is paramount. And one thing, the whole reason I got started into security 10 years ago was because I started doing functional safety projects and went through and got accredited and spent years doing the deployment of SIS architectures. And all of a sudden started to realize that there was a tight connection to operational integrity, not saying the hackability of a safety system, but the ability to impact the stability of an operating facility through cyber methods and the normal control system, and how it could have detrimental impact to the same reason we put safety in today, which whether it's environmental impact of an impact to human health and safety, loss of life, and so on. So one of the initial strategies that we started to portray and started to position was the creation of an equal level security role in major projects. So we all do projects and we have security officers. I'm surprised this mean in the past we've always seen them. Usually they're the people in the red FRCs. My company has red. It's very similar to a soccer red card, right? When you see an unsafe act, you can issue a red card. No questions asked. People stop what they're doing. When we get to that level in cyber, which is something that my personal style of managing projects, I always start a meeting with the safety moment, but I follow it up with a security moment. We have safety red cards. I introduce security red cards. When you see somebody acknowledging one of those screens on their mobile device that says, in order for me to use this app, I want to have access to your personal information, your social security number, your wife's name, your kid's name, and so on, right? I'm joking. But that's the idea. So people need to start treating it at the same level and doing it in the same means that we've been successful today on safety, developing safety and security metrics. Again, I was very impressed with my company when I hired in with them last summer, is they actually do that. They have security metrics that they share, which means they do track them. Now, there's nothing that you could do from a company peer-to-peer standpoint like you could recordables or lost time incidents. But the idea is that we're starting to get there, and I encourage your company to take that on to make security more of a personal experience.
Okay, and remember, I think we have mics being available. If you have a question, get a mic, but I think, Ernie, you wanted to comment on that?
Yeah, I just want to go back. Joel's comment reminded me of a situation that I bet could apply to everybody in this room. I was at a liquefied natural gas plant asked to do a risk assessment, and it was literally that vague of a request. But the intention is to take a good hard look at how we do our business and identify any unusual acts, risky issues, or whatever. Okay, so we're talking about safety versus security. And in this particular facility, I was shocked to see that their SIS controls, so safety instrumented system, which are extremely critical for this plant, were inside the same cabinet as basically their operational controls. And I asked the plant manager, I said, what would happen if there was a fire or a catastrophic failure on the operational side equipment that could essentially affect the SIS? And he turned a little bit ashen, and his response was, I don't know how we designed it this way. This is crazy. So you've got to think through safety and security, and I'm going to go back to my first comment earlier, is ask why. Why is it set up this way? Understand the design basis and how it can be justified for safety and security.
Go ahead.
So one of the things I think about when this conversation is safety or security, it takes me back to when I first started in security many, many moons ago, and I was an attack and penetration performer. And one of the engagements we had was over baked goods. And we were able to penetrate in and take control of the ovens and lock the doors, turn them on. And when we had the completion discussion with the customer and really brought this to their attention, they were a bit surprised and actually a bit shocked. And what we came to understand is that these ovens were the size of about a football field, and when you do that and turn them on, the people inside cleaning them usually have a bad day. And so I think this connection between safety and security is much deeper than we normally understand, but we need to go a little bit farther in understanding what is the impact of cybersecurity failure to a loss of life situation or a loss of or destruction of asset situation. And when we do that, we can bridge between the two cultures, which is what we effectively have, between cybersecurity, industrial control, safety security. And this was very relevant to me when I was doing integrations of SS7 networks over to IPs. And that cultural difference between telco and cyber was very significant. And we spent many, many months of just understanding each other. And once we got through those hurdles, those connections were very easy to really drive.
Do we have a question in the audience?
Yes, thank you very much. We've got 2 questions in the audience, and I'm going to ask them for their name, their company, and their question. And perhaps they're directing their question to a specific individual.
Yeah, hi there. This is Amir. My name is Amir Alim. I'm the part of network security for KNPC. My question is directed to Mr. John Matherly, the owner of Shodan. So, sir, thank you for the service. I understand that, you know, this, of course, would be a good service that would help people, you know, figure out what services are open on the internet and all that. But I just went through the, you know, the list of IPs and the username and passwords and whatever was available. I just want to know, and you can, you know, correct me if I'm wrong. Isn't it isn't this information available to everyone on the internet, ethical and unethical? So how do you ensure that this data, this information, which is certainly, you know, confidential, doesn't land up in the wrong hands?
So that's actually a good question. We get that quite a bit, as you can imagine. And so there are a few things to that. First of all, we have rate limiting on the website. We block certain like VPN, Tor access. We have several measures in place to prevent access from certain locations. Second of all, if you've used a website, you've noticed that if you want to use a search filter, meaning if you want to search by a port or you want to search by country, you need to log in, which means you need to create an account. Accounts are free, sure. If you have a free account, you can only see 50 results. Now, I don't think you can take down the internet or cause too much damage with those 50 results. The basic idea behind the website in general is to give you an overview of what's available. We don't give you the full list of results. We don't give you access to everything that we collect. We just tell you, based on your search query, you know, here are a few so you can validate that your search returns what you think it should, but we don't give you the whole database for obvious reasons, as you just stated. And then if you do want to have more access, that's where we make our money, right? We work with companies that have security companies and things like that. So we have many steps in place. And honestly, nowadays, the barrier to entry for doing what Shodan does, I mean, I think there are enough, you can run Nmap, for example, right? You can just rent a box, you run Nmap, and you can do these kind of things. Not at the scale that Shodan does, but you can do it. You can run a botnet. There are illegal ways of doing it. And what we've seen over the years is that it turns out even a small barrier to entry for like a Shodan membership website fee is enough to drive away the bad guys. They would much rather use, you know, a botnet or any other source to get their data. So we've been operating for 8 years now, and that has not been a problem. So I know that's been a sort of a concern always, are you helping the bad guys more than the good guys? And based on everything we've seen over the past 8 years, we can say that, no, we have not had a problem with that situation. We continuously monitor it, obviously, but no, we don't, empirically speaking, it hasn't been an issue.
And Dale, we have time for one more question from the front. We've got about 2.5 minutes remaining.
All right, I'll keep it focused. It's Bill Cotter again from ISA. And I guess we were talking about safety and security, which brings in another team member now. We should be talking to the safety team. But if you want to discuss, any of you, how it should change process hazard analysis that would be done on systems?
Well, I'll be short to give everybody else a chance since we're limited. As far as PHAs and the whole HAZOP process, normally that's a key input for when our team sits down and does risk assessments. So that's usually, and the good thing is it occurs early in the process, where in order to understand the criticality of your ICS assets, you really do have to see how the PHA and HAZOPs were done so that you can align them. Because again, it's kind of like my refinery diagram. If you have hundreds of controllers, they are not all equally important. There is a set and subset of those that are more important. And the way you get to that answer is through your PHAs and HAZOPs.
Any other thoughts or comments on that? I would just say, having participated in some, that the PHA results are really a great place to start because it identifies the really bad things that can happen. And adding I had that actually in my presentation, adding a cyber presence and creating or adding cyber to the PHA is something that has to happen in the next 2 to 5 years. And it's going to be a pretty dramatic culture shift, I think, for both sides to get there. But with that, I think we will maybe give the extra minute back to the program. And if you could, join me in thanking our panelists.